Right. Nick, does it look like it's recording on your end? Did you see the start recording there?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and begin. This is the podcast for Multifaith Matters, and we're privileged to have as our guest today Nick Armstrong. And Nick, I think you do your work with your wife, Laura, and you folks are at Cole Community Church in Boise, Idaho, and you're doing some fantastic work with the Muslim community. And through our conversation today, I just want to help tell that story. Can you begin by sharing a little bit of your background? How did you get to this place where you at the church are doing this work?
Well, yeah, actually, we left for Indonesia in 1990 with the aim of working with a Christian relief and development organization. And so Indonesia was where we ended up. We didn't really even know where Indonesia was at the time, but so we ended up there, and Indonesia happens to be the largest population of Muslims in the world. And so we were there 23 years. And through that experience, through a lot of relationships, we got to know a lot of Muslims and worked, with a lot of Muslim teams and a variety of different contexts. So, yeah. So that was, the main exposure that we had to Islam was that. And we also actually were with World Vision for an internship in Senegal, West Africa, which is our introduction to a mosque going off at 4 a.m. And and so we began to study and understand, the Islamic faith with our interest there, and then it just only continued to grow as we had ministry in Indonesia.
It's interesting to me. This is kind of an aside related to what you just said. Your background, your work in missions led you into this kind of dialogical hospitality kind of approach. My background's in missions and missiology. We're going to be doing a podcast soon with Bob Roberts of Northwood Church. He had an experience in mission. How do you see mission kind of helping prepare you for this?
Well, yeah, when I look at the kind of work that God gave me the privilege to enter into, we were in situations where there was a tsunami. I worked in 30 different relief and development or disaster areas for disaster response, and Aceh was one. That was the tsunami of 2004. And so we developed a team of 60 different people on that team, 40 of which were Muslim. And so we, blood, sweat, and tears worked together for the disaster response, for restoration of fields, and a variety of different things. We had a restoration of homes where we had home building, but it was all through a community effort. And a lot of relationships were built through that. And so that sort of experience changes you. You begin to see things differently. You begin to understand things differently through that kind of personal relationship. One example was just in West Java, where there was an earthquake. And the first responders to helping a community that was somewhat isolated in West Java was a church that had actually 10 years earlier been burned down by some radical elements within that community. And some of those were from the village that they were actually helping. So some amazing sort of dynamics that take place when you begin to enter into life-on-life situations.
Yeah. Yep. Now I'm in Utah. You're in Boise, Idaho. I've done a lot of work with developing relationships with Mormons. That's the dominant religious tradition in Utah, and I think in Boise, maybe even more so in Idaho in general. How did you come to develop relationships with the Muslim community?
Well, yeah, when we came back, which was about 5 years ago in 2013, we started an organization that's really a ministry of our church, but it's an organization called Local Community Partners, and it was with this idea of, helping to mobilize, train, and to connect the church with those who came as strangers, those who were refugees. And it so happens that Boise has a somewhat unique demographic in that those that have come as refugees, 50% happen to be Muslim, from a variety of different Muslim cultures and backgrounds and nations. And also, if you look at the main mosque here in Boise, has the majority of Muslims attending. 95% of those actually came as refugees. So there's this incredible overlap. And so, I think that was with intention, where we continued our work with Muslims, but real bridge there with the fact that we're working with refugees who happen to be Muslim. And so, we, interestingly enough, a year after we moved back to Boise, the largest mosque was all the way across town. It happened to move about a block from my house, and so that only made it even a more vibrant kind of relationship, where we're at the mosque quite a bit, building relationships there. So so it's kind of a natural draw to work with Muslims because of our experience in Indonesia, but our ministry here has opened up a tremendous opportunity to build relationships with Muslims here in Boise.
Now, you're not doing this ministry by yourself. You got some people involved there. Who are some of those folks, both Christians and Muslims, that are involved in this peacemaking effort?
Yeah, actually, we deal with a lot of volunteers. Mobilizing volunteers from the church is kind of a big part of what we do. So we've had over 60 different churches within this Treasure Valley, is what they call the broader area. And volunteers from over 60 different churches have come to trainings. Only probably about a third of those have actually gotten involved in our ministry, but still there's a lot of exposure to churches through that. So there's been a cooperation in terms of the volunteers from the churches, and then there's been some real key churches that have really gotten on board, wanting to get involved in that ministry. So there's those volunteers. We've also, with the Islamic Center here in Boise, we work in collaboration with them. We feel like the best way to build relationship is by serving the community together, and we get to know each other best through that. And then Peace Catalyst is an international organization. It's an organization that we're part of and we partner with deeply, and so they've been a big part of our journey, helping us kind of process things, and so we've really appreciated their partnership.
And what kind of activities do you folks engage in?
Well, a variety of different things. As I mentioned, we do collaboration with the Islamic Center. One of the ways that we collaborate, the fact that 95% of the Islamic Center is comprised of those that have come as refugees, means there's a lot of families in need, because oftentimes they come, with bare minimum, and they're trying to kind of set up life here in America, and oftentimes they don't have language, and oftentimes even those who have professional credentials, they can't begin to use those right away. There's a long process to get them, certified or get their credentials up to speed to be able to work in their profession here. So there's a lot of needs within those families, and so what we've done is we've created what we call the Shed. It's a very uncreative name, but it's really about helping needy families, and it's not just for those that have come as refugees, but it's primarily been that since we got started 3 years ago. So this is a way of putting together kits for household things that are needed, and so it just helps refugee families with their expenses. So they get kits for their kitchen, so pots and pans and plates and all the cutlery and a variety of different things for bathrooms and cleaning and that sort of thing. And so that's what we've done together and helped to distribute. The other thing we do is Peace Feasts. And Peace Feasts we do together as well. It's really just being able to break bread together as a community between Muslims and Christians. We initially started with a lot of different small dinners that we would hold at restaurants. There'd be like 10 Christians and 10 Muslims, and we would have a time of discussion, a time of presentation so we could learn about each other. And so that's been a real rich experience. One of the very first Peace Feasts we had was actually at a restaurant where the owner of the restaurant said they were going to close down the restaurant in order for our function to take place. But it so happens that the owner allowed other people to drift in, and one of the people that had drifted in was a student at Boise State that was from Saudi Arabia. And after he listened to this whole process of dialogue throughout the dinner, he took me aside, took me out of the restaurant and started to talk to me and said, "Hey, I am so impressed with what I've heard tonight and just the way and the spirit in which you've done this, that I'd like to just pay for the entire meal for." So that was a $500 bill for all those people. And so you can imagine, so that was, those are rich experiences that we just really, has been a big part of it. We have a Thanksgiving Peace Feast that we've done for the last 4 years, and that's grown from 100 people to 350 people that we did this last year. And that's a room filled, it's probably 150 of those are Muslims. So a good number of refugees and Muslims come to that, and that's a real rich time. Another thing that we do is a collaboration with a workshop at the Idaho Conference for Refugees. We put on a workshop about building empathy, building hospitality. How is it that we are able to embrace each other in a way that still respects each other's convictions and beliefs and that sort of thing. So that's been a real rich time to work on that together. In fact, that's coming up here in another few weeks. Also, I don't know if you're aware, John, this last year we had a tragedy here in Boise where there were, at an apartment complex, there was a guy who attacked families who were refugees, and all of them happened to be Muslim as well. And he attacked with a knife, killing a 3-year-old at her birthday party, and then injuring 8 others, so the total of 9 that were involved. And so we've been working closely with the Islamic Center just in that response, in how is it we can come alongside and love these families in a way that helps in their trauma and helps in their restoration. So so we've done a variety of things like that. One of the things I'm doing just separate really from the Islamic Center is a sort of course. Rod Cardova has put together a course. He's out of San Jose, California, and he's put together a course called Loving Your Muslim Neighbors, and we've done a similar kind of a version of that, done 4 different, basically it's a 2-hour training on how it is we can build bridges between Muslims and Christians, and so that's another thing that we've done as well.
Sounds like you have a lot of great stuff going on there. Unfortunately, most evangelical churches don't do this. I think we tend to either shy away from people in other religious traditions, particularly Muslims, or if we do engage them, it's largely evangelism and some apologetics. What is it that led you to do things this way, and how do you understand Scripture as informing the kinds of things that you're doing at your church?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Your last podcast, or at least one of your podcasts, I don't know if it was your last one, but with Bob Robinson, I believe, who wrote the book Jesus and the Religions. really resonated with that, because in it he's really talking about how it is we learn from Jesus' example. And just seeing Jesus' example in Scripture, what I see is a sort of a recognition and affirmation of someone's humanity, their journey, their struggles, embracing sinners and tax collectors, and how he introduced his ministry in Luke 4, and just seeing that indeed the kingdom was made available to everyone. And so it doesn't mean that we avoid, proclamation or apologetics. It just means that there's a sort of intentional start with expanding our circle of hospitality, where a person can really feel welcomed and safe. And I think the order is important, that it's hospitality informs the way that we do proclamation. It informs the way that we do apologetics. The 1 Peter 3 idea with gentleness and respect as we, share our convictions and are given opportunity. So I think it's that example of Jesus' hospitality is intrinsic to the gospel. The good news is understandable through that example. And so we try to follow Jesus in that. And, God's love is revealed in the person of Jesus. And Jesus reveals that through his church. And so we're going to follow him in how he went about doing it. So I think that's probably, the core of our approach.
Yeah, and then when you do it that way, the good news actually sounds more like good news, I think. So I think you're onto something there. Now, what was the response of your church members when you started doing this, and how did you handle the resistance, if there was any?
Yeah, for the most part, very positive and very supportive. I mean, for our church, for example, to even consider having this our ministry with those who've come as refugees as part of their church ministry is something that reflects just the sort of support that they're willing to give. There's been those within the congregation that primarily support what we're doing, but there is somewhat of a mixed bag. There have been those that have given pushback. We've had a few families actually leave because of our ministry in particular with Muslims. I think that there are attitudes and theologies that are shaped kind of through this narrow window of a selective media outlets and websites and social media and that sort of thing. And so that's one of the reasons that our main approach is really stressing the building of friendships and relationships with real people, with real families and real children who have the same sort of, it's a human connection where it's like, wow, there's this is the same sort of life that I'm living as well. And so there's a lot of understanding that comes through those relationships. That's one of the real centerpieces of our ministry, is to stress those building of friendships and relationships.
Sounds like your experience at your church is similar to what I've heard in other church congregations. So there's kind of an interesting a pattern in that regard. Now, you mentioned Peace Catalyst and some of your work with them. One of the things we're trying to do with Multifaith Matters is take the individual work of churches like yours and organizations like Peace Catalyst and put ourselves together. Think of ourselves as a growing network in evangelicalism, so we can create a new narrative that you can be good evangelicals and engage in this kind of hospitality, peacemaking, and this kind of thing. Can you say a little bit more about your partnership with Peace Catalyst?
Well, it's been very positive. We've learned a lot. Rick Love is the director, and learned a lot from him. Actually, interestingly enough, I first met Rick in 1990 when we first moved to Indonesia, and where I met him was at his home, where he had actually established a little mushola in the top room of his home, as a sort of contextualized way of relating to his neighbors. But so since then, we've we've really developed a friendship, and we just really felt like the approach that he was using was to really look at Jesus, to really focus on Jesus as the ultimate peacemaker. And so, just following that example and having the main goal of Peace Catalyst as being, you know, the sort of integrity and the fidelity to Jesus' example, and then making our peacemaking initiatives built around that. That really excited me, and so we've been working with them for the last 4 years, and it's been a great, it's been a great partnership with them.
Yeah. One final question for you, Nick. Having done this for a number of years here in the, you started in missions, now you're in the local church context in America. What advice and encouragement would you give to pastors and churches and lay people who may want to start and do this kind of work in their own church context?
Yeah, that's a real involved question, but I would say that, like I was talking about, the idea of encouraging relationships and friendships with Muslims is just vital. That we don't shape our understanding of Islam, we don't shape our attitudes and understanding of Muslims through a website or through selective media sources, but we rather have those shaped by the relationship that we have with real people. And it doesn't mean that we'll always come in agreement or that there won't be problems in those relationships, but it's through those relationships that we really begin to understand. And so I think it's kind of a difficult thing because it's intimidating to take a first step in trying to build a relationship with people from a different culture, different religion, and so they're told, that taking the step into that is difficult, and so we really try to help to build bridges so that those first baby steps can take place. But it is something that needs to be done with intentionality. Expanding our circle of hospitality, it requires, I think, us to be able to see our Muslim neighbors not first as Muslims, but as people who have children and who have the same needs that we do, and also as people who are made in God's image and they're the beloved of God. And it's so central to, I think, being able to see that first before we see other things is really what helps to build bridges rather than walls. And so, our proclivity as human beings to be in groups, to be in tribes, to love those around us, and then kind of exclude others is something that we have to intentionally recognize. We have to, repent, and to be able to see things within ourselves that will then allow us to go to the Spirit to say, do a work in me. How is it that you can help me to change in such a way that I can see these Muslim neighbors as people that you love, as people made in your image? And so that's what I would encourage, is that building of relationship and friendships.
Great words of encouragement and advice. And those who are interested can not only listen to this podcast and hear your story, but they can go to our Church Stories page and find a link to what you're doing, your story. They can find a link to the church and get more information. I think we also have a video from the Idaho Statesman about the great work that you're doing at your Peace Feasts. And I just encourage people to learn more about what you're doing. And we appreciate, you were one of the churches that got involved with Multifaith Matters, and we were doing our case studies of hospitable churches a few years ago. So I appreciate your partnership and what you're doing and making time for the interview today.
It's our pleasure. Yeah. Thanks, John. Appreciate the opportunity.